I met Richard at a grief support group 3 years after my husband passed. He was soft-spoken, tender, and seemed to understand loss in a way most people didn't. His wife Margaret had died 2 years earlier from breast cancer, and when he talked about her, his eyes filled with the kind of pain I recognized in my own mirror every morning. Our first date was coffee after group. He brought me daisies, my favorite, though I'd never told him. "Margaret loved daisies too," he said with a sad smile. I thought it was sweet, a connection between us. Looking back, that was the first warning sign I ignored. 6 months later, we married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. My daughter Jennifer flew in from Seattle, though I could see the concern in her eyes when she met Richard. "Mom, are you sure about this?" she asked the night before. "You barely know him." But I was lonely. I was tired of eating dinner alone and watching television by myself every night. Richard seemed kind, attentive, safe. I thought I was building a second chance at happiness. I had no idea I was walking into a carefully constructed prison. The comparison started during our honeymoon in Charleston. I ordered shrimp and grits at a waterfront restaurant, and Richard's face fell. Margaret always ordered the she-crab soup here. She said the shrimp was too ordinary. I felt foolish, like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. I changed my order. That night, I wore a blue dress to dinner. Richard frowned. "Margaret never wore blue. She said it washed her out. You have similar coloring, maybe you should avoid it too." I packed the dress away when we got home and never wore it again. Within weeks of moving into his house, the house he'd shared with Margaret, I started noticing things. Photos of her everywhere. Not just 1 or 2 memorial pictures, but dozens. On the mantle, the hallway, even the bathroom. Her wedding china still in the cabinets. Her monogrammed towels in the linen closet, her reading glasses on the nightstand. "Don't you think we should put some of these things away?" I asked gently one evening. "Not forget her, just make the house feel like ours?" Richard's expression hardened. "Margaret decorated this house with love and care. She had impeccable taste. I'm not changing anything." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. I tried to bring pieces of my own life into the house. I hung a painting I'd done in a watercolor class years ago in the living room. When I came home from the grocery store the next day, it was gone. Margaret's landscape painting was back in its place. "Where's my painting?" I asked. "I put it in the garage," Richard said, not looking up from his newspaper. It clashed with Margaret's decor. She was very particular about the aesthetic flow of this room. I started cooking dinners, trying to make our evenings feel warm and homey. The first time I made pot roast, Richard took 1 bite and set down his fork. Margaret made the most incredible pot roast. She slow-cooked it for 8 hours with her grandmother's secret ingredient. This tastes rushed. I'd cooked it for 6 hours. I bought a slow cooker the next day and searched online for pot roast recipes, trying to find one that might meet his standards. Every meal became an audition I was failing. "Margaret's meatloaf was legendary," he'd say, pushing food around his plate. "Margaret's lasagna won awards at church potlucks." Margaret could make a simple roast chicken taste like a 5-star restaurant. I bought cookbooks. I watched cooking shows. I tried recipe after recipe, but nothing was ever right. Nothing was ever Margaret. My friend Carol invited me to join her for a painting class at the community center on Tuesday evenings. I'd always loved painting, and the class sounded like a welcome escape. When I mentioned it to Richard over dinner, he set down his wine glass with a careful precision that should have warned me. "A painting class? Don't you think that's a bit frivolous?" Margaret believed in spending evenings at home, creating a peaceful sanctuary. She'd never run off to some class. "It's just 2 hours a week," I said quietly. "And what am I supposed to do while you're off playing artist?" Margaret understood that marriage means being present for your spouse. She made our home her priority. I didn't sign up for the class. But the following week, Richard announced he'd be going to his Lions Club meeting every Thursday evening. When I pointed out the contradiction, he looked genuinely puzzled. "That's different. Lions Club is community service." Margaret always supported my involvement. She understood the importance of civic duty. The isolation crept in slowly, like fog rolling over the harbor. Carol stopped calling after I turned down her invitations too many times. My book club meetings conflicted with Richard's schedule, and he needed me home to make dinner. My weekly coffee with my neighbor Janet ended when Richard mentioned that Margaret never spent time gossiping with the neighbors. She was too dignified for that. One by one, my connections to the outside world frayed and snapped. I told myself I was being a good wife, compromising, adjusting. I didn't recognize that I was disappearing. The control escalated. Richard started commenting on my clothes every morning. "Are you wearing that dress?" Margaret never wore patterns that busy. She said they made a woman look desperate for attention. I changed clothes. "Your hair looks messy today." Margaret always had her hair properly styled before I came home from work. I bought new hair products, spent an extra 30 minutes getting ready each morning. "You're wearing too much lipstick." Margaret wore just a touch, she said. Anything more was garish. I wiped it off. Every aspect of my appearance became subject to his scrutiny, always measured against Margaret's alleged perfection. I started to feel like I was wearing a costume of someone else's expectations, playing a role in a show I'd never auditioned for. When my daughter called, Richard would stand nearby, listening. If I talked too long, he'd tap his watch meaningfully. Margaret never spent hours on the phone, he told me after one call. She said it was rude to ignore the person right in front of you. Jennifer's calls became shorter. My voice became smaller. The grief group had been my lifeline. But 6 months into our marriage, Richard announced I should stop going. "We've moved on from grief group. We have each other now." Margaret would say that dwelling on the past prevents us from fully embracing the present. "But those people understand what I've been through," I protested weakly. "I understand what you've been through. Isn't that enough? Or am I not enough for you?" His voice carried a wounded tone that made me feel guilty for wanting anything beyond him. I stopped going to grief group. The panic attacks started around month 8. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, feeling like the walls were closing in. I was suffocating in someone else's life, haunted by the ghost of a woman I'd never met but could never measure up to. I started having fantasies about my old house, the one I'd sold when we married. I'd dream about my own furniture, my own kitchen, my own space where I could breathe without wondering if Margaret would have approved. During our first-year anniversary dinner, I tried to talk to Richard about how I was feeling. We were at an Italian restaurant, and I'd ordered the chicken marsala. He'd ordered the veal piccata, Margaret's favorite, he informed the waiter. "Richard, I need to talk to you about something important," I began, my hands trembling slightly as I held my wine glass. "Of course, darling." His smile was warm, attentive. "I've been feeling lost. Like I'm living in someone else's shadow. All the comparisons to Margaret, they're making me feel like I'm not good enough, like I'll never be good enough." His expression shifted, confusion crossing his features. "Comparisons? I'm simply sharing memories of my late wife. Surely you're not so insecure that you feel threatened by a woman who's been gone for 4 years." The word insecure stung like a slap. It's not about being insecure. It's about feeling like you're constantly measuring me against her and finding me wanting. "I think you're being overly sensitive," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. Margaret never got upset about little things like this. She had a thick skin, a certain emotional maturity. Even my feelings weren't valid. Even my pain was a failure compared to Margaret. I stopped trying to talk to him about it. What was the point? Every concern was dismissed. Every hurt was proof of my inadequacy. The final breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October, 14 months into our marriage. I was making dinner chicken with rice and vegetables when my vision started to blur. I gripped the counter, trying to steady myself, but my legs gave out. The room spun, tilted, and I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, my head striking the tile. When I came to, Richard was leaning over me, his face pale with panic. "Don't move," he said. "I'm calling an ambulance." The hospital was bright and cold. Richard held my hand as they wheeled me into an examination room, his concern seeming genuine. When the ER doctor came in, a calm woman in her 50s named Dr. Morrison, Richard immediately took charge of the narrative. "She tripped over our dog," he explained smoothly. "We have a golden retriever, and she's always underfoot. I've told my wife to be more careful, but you know how it is." Dr. Morrison's eyes flickered to me. "We didn't have a dog. We'd never had a dog. Margaret had been allergic." "Is that what happened?" Dr. Morrison asked me directly. I opened my mouth to agree with Richard's story. It was easier. It was what I always did. But something in Dr. Morrison's steady gaze, something in the gentle firmness of her tone, made me hesitate. "No," I whispered. "We don't have a dog." Richard's hand tightened on mine. A warning. "Honey, you're confused. The fall must have—" "I need to speak with my patient privately," Dr. Morrison interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Sir, please wait outside." I'd never seen Richard look so panicked. "But I'm her husband. I should be here." "Hospital policy," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "I'll call you back in shortly." Once Richard left, Dr. Morrison pulled a chair close to my bed. "Tell me what really happened." The story poured out. The comparisons, the isolation, the control. How I hadn't eaten properly in weeks because nothing I cooked was good enough. How I'd been having dizzy spells but was afraid to tell Richard because Margaret never complained about minor ailments. How I'd stopped sleeping, stopped painting, stopped being myself until I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Dr. Morrison listened without interruption. When I finished, she squeezed my hand. "What you're describing is emotional abuse. The physical symptoms you're experiencing, the collapse, the dizzy spells, the panic, those are your body's way of telling you it can't survive in this environment." "But he's never hit me," I said weakly. "Abuse doesn't have to be physical to destroy you," she said quietly. "I'm going to have our social worker come talk to you, and I'm recommending you stay overnight for observation. Your blood pressure is dangerously low, and you're severely dehydrated and malnourished. He'll be angry if I stay overnight. He doesn't get a vote in your medical care." The social worker, a kind man named David, came in an hour later. He explained about domestic violence resources, about the cycle of emotional abuse, about how isolation and constant criticism were classic control tactics. He gave me phone numbers, shelter information, a safety plan. "You don't have to decide anything right now," David said, "but you should know that you have options. You don't have to live like this." Richard was waiting when David left, his expression carefully arranged into concern. But I saw something else underneath a calculation, a worry that his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. "The doctor says you need to stay overnight," he said. "I'll bring you some things from home. Your nightgown, your toiletries, though I'm not sure where you put everything." Margaret always kept her toiletries in the blue cosmetic bag in the second drawer. Even here, in the hospital, with me hooked up to an IV, he couldn't help himself. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I made a decision. I called Jennifer. "Mom? Are you okay? It's 3 a.m. I need you to come get me tomorrow. I'm leaving him." There was a pause. Then I heard my daughter crying with relief. "Thank God. Mom, I've been so worried. You haven't sounded like yourself in months." "I haven't been myself in months. But I'm ready to come home." "You're already home, Mom. Wherever you are, that's home." The next morning, when Richard arrived with my things, I told him I was leaving. His face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, a cold dismissiveness. "You're making a mistake. You'll never find anyone else at your age." Margaret appreciated what we had. She never would have thrown away a marriage over nothing. "This isn't nothing," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in over a year. "And I'm not Margaret. I never will be, and I don't want to be." "You'll come crawling back," he said as he left. "You'll realize what you've lost." But I already knew what I'd lost myself, and I was determined to find her again. Jennifer helped me move into a small apartment near her in Seattle. It took 3 months of therapy to understand the full extent of what had happened. My therapist, Dr. Chen, explained that what Richard had done was called ghost gaslighting, using a deceased spouse as a weapon to control and diminish the living one. "He created an impossible standard," Dr. Chen explained. "Margaret became perfect in his retelling, and you could never compete with a ghost." Every comparison was designed to make you feel inadequate, to break down your sense of self until you were completely dependent on his approval. I learned that Richard had been married 3 times. Margaret was actually his second wife, and there had been a wife before her who'd also left. The pattern was becoming clear. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a woman he could mold into his idealized version of what a wife should be, and when she inevitably failed to meet his impossible standards, he moved on to the next one. Margaret herself had tried to leave him twice before her cancer diagnosis. Her sister reached out to me months later, after hearing through mutual friends what had happened. We met for coffee, and she filled in the pieces I'd been missing. Richard rewrote history after Margaret died, her sister told me. He made her sound like a saint, but the truth is, their marriage was miserable. She was planning to file for divorce when she got diagnosed. She only stayed because she was too sick to leave. The revelation was both heartbreaking and liberating. Margaret wasn't the perfect woman Richard had painted her to be. She was a real person who'd suffered under the same control I had. I wasn't failing to measure up to her. I was failing to accept abuse, and that was actually a success. Slowly, I rebuilt my life. I took a painting class and discovered I was actually pretty good. I joined a book club and made friends who knew me, not Richard's version of me. I went back to grief group and reconnected with people who understood loss without weaponizing it. I bought a small house, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls lavender, a color Richard would have hated. I hung my own artwork. I filled it with mismatched furniture from thrift stores and estate sales, pieces that made me happy rather than pieces that impressed anyone else. On quiet evenings, I cook whatever I feel like eating. Sometimes it's pot roast, sometimes it's cereal for dinner, and it's always perfect, because I'm cooking for myself, pleasing myself, living for myself. Jennifer visits often, and sometimes she brings her kids. They love the lavender walls and the fact that Grandma lets them eat ice cream before dinner sometimes. "You seem like you again, Mom," Jennifer told me during her last visit. "I missed you." "I missed me too," I said. If I could tell my story to anyone who might be living in a similar shadow, I would say this: you are not being too sensitive. Your feelings are valid. Grief is real and painful, but it should never be used as a weapon against you. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not measured against who you aren't. Your partner should build you up, not tear you down. They should celebrate your strengths, not constantly highlight your weaknesses. They should want you to have friends, hobbies, a life outside of them. If someone is isolating you, controlling you, making you feel small, that's not love, that's abuse. And you are stronger than you know. I was 62 years old when I left, terrified I was too old to start over. But I did it, and my life now is richer and fuller than it ever was in that house where I walked on eggshells around a ghost. You deserve your own space, your own voice, your own life. Don't let anyone living or dead take that away from you. You are not alone. Resources are available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. They helped me understand what was happening and find the support I needed to leave safely. Your life is worth living. Your happiness matters. And you deserve so much more than being someone's second-rate version of a ghost. Trust yourself. Trust that small voice inside that says something isn't right. Trust that you deserve better, because you do. I'm 74 now, and I can honestly say that leaving Richard was the best decision I ever made. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and that's worth everything.